with a life story that is so unusual and so powerful, which she translates the reality into an extraordinary memoir. And so thank you again for being here. And Kelley, we'll start asking you when you decided to write this book.
2005.
And I'll read Bill's remark. Bill Boggs was going to be here tonight and was knocked down by COVID, and Kelley asked me to join in, and I appreciate that. Bill wrote, and this is on the front of the book, this memoir of single motherhood, disability, and an unlikely off-road adventure around the world delivers just what I'm looking for in my reading these days, courage.
Yeah.
And this really is a profile in courage. And so the second part of that first question is, when, during the process of planning to write this and getting into it, when did you know you had the power of courage that was going to be necessary to relive the reality that you had experienced?
Those words aren't words that I really have used yet, that power of courage. It was just something I had to do to get through it. I was even on the journey writing passages about what I saw in Bosnia when I was in Greece. I was already writing about it just to be able to process it. But when I decided to turn it into a memoir is Eric Trethewey, who is my former partner and the father of my son, when we first met, and I told him I'd just gotten back from this journey, and he took me by the shoulders and said, "You don't even know you're a writer, do you?" And I said, "I'm just Kelley." And he said, "You have to write this story." And so I began writing it then in earnest, and I wrote it first as a series of short stories, and then I rewrote it as a novel, and I had an agent from New York that was interested in it. And she said, "You say it's based on autobiography, give me a percentage." So I wrote her back and I said, "At this point it's 75% true." She goes, "Here's my problem, it's too unbelievable for fiction. You need to rewrite it as memoir." So that's when I started that. And then life invaded for a good 10 years, but I kept plucking at it until here we are.
So when you started, you did have some journal material?
Yes.
You're not writing entirely from memory?
No.
Could you say a percentage?
I'm not a math person.
About how much?
I have probably one little box of scrap papers and articles and journal notes and everything from that journey that I pilfered from. And then I also did a ton of research on top of it so that I could try to verify as much of my memory as possible. So I learned a lot about, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, the Bosnian War. I mean, all the random things you end up researching when you're writing a book. So, yeah, and then sometimes you can spend 3 months researching something and one sentence makes it into the book. You know that story?
I do know that story. I also know that at various times during your exploration towards a publisher, that you were encouraged to let go the flashback techniques and tell this story in a more linear chronological fashion, and that you could have done that, but you resisted that. And I wonder if you might say something.
Initially, I resisted it. Initially, when I first got it accepted for publication, it was just a book of essays. And they largely were not present tense, and they largely kept my daughter out of the spotlight. And of course, that was I wanted to do that as a mother to protect her. She's almost 26. She's here tonight. Cecilia.
Sorry.
Love you.
And so she was a grown woman, but finally, and I just said, "Cecilia, they want you. And if I'm going to have to give them you, and you are my heart," which means I kind of had to just like vomit it up and watch it flip flop like a fish on the ground for a while, and try to clean it up here and there. And that's basically how that worked.
This is a wild story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's thoughtful. Kelley put a lot of planning into many, if not most, of the moments here. But they're just wild things that you didn't anticipate that came at you and Celie as you were moving about in the world's biggest, strongest Land Rover, military grade, which is a wonderful lot of the overall tale here is Kelley's having this amazing machine to move about, not only to move about with, but to be responsible for and to know how to be responsible. A big trait that Kelley has is excellent high-grade mechanic. And I think that comes through here, and it's often at a great surprise to the men who show up and don't expect anything like the expertise Kelley has. And I'm in that long line because I was parked over at her house in Ocracoke one time, and I had
They were just windshield wipers, Bland.
I had just given up on putting the windshield wipers on the little car, and I had just was throwing them into the back seat. Kelley said, "What are you doing?" I said, it's terrible. No one should ever try to put windshield wipers in a car." She said, "Give them to me, come on." And they were on the car in about 30 seconds. And so my admiration grew even more.
My father was a mechanic. I grew up in a garage, so came by it honestly.
You want to take
But let me just say one thing too, that Land Rover really became an extension of my legs. It became something that could transport me to places I could no longer get to easily. So it was very symbolic, and yeah, I loved it.
And you named it.
Athena.
And it's a real character.
Yeah, and when you say it's a wild story, there was some, I was a classical studies major with a concentration in ancient Greek and languages, and so the Odyssey was definitely playing forth in my head all through it. Yeah, I definitely wanted to mimic some of that. And in fact, a lot of it is written in iambic pentameter.
Well, can you tell us a little bit of what that is?
I said you were thoughtful. When did you know you were finished? And as far as how far forward or this way in your life you were going to let this memoir carry you?
I'm not sure what that means.
These are events from some years ago.
2003, almost 20 years. Yeah,
And you might have come even more forward toward now.
yeah, that's
might
the
have.
next book.
So Ocracoke.
Oh yeah, Ocracoke. I might get kicked off the island after the next book. Hurricane Dorian.
That's a big story, as we know.
And actually, I finished this book when my house was completely destroyed from Dorian, and I was slowly rebuilding it, and I had the kitchen and dining room intact. And I would take break. I would get up at 6 in the morning and finish this till noon, and then I would go put the house back together. So I did this version of the book. Even though it took me 20 years to write so many different versions, I finished this in like 6 weeks.
You worked for
6 weeks
15
straight.
years to finish it in 6 weeks.
That's correct.
Picasso said something like that one time.
Yeah.
What I believe. I think we should hear from you. We wanted to concentrate on Kelley's reading and speaking, and then have us take some questions and notes and queries.
Thank you so much.
Of
You've
course.
been such a wonderful friend and so supportive of this book all along, and to have someone with your background and success has meant a lot.
Thank you for asking me to be here.
Yeah, of course.
Kelley Shinn.
Thank you, Flyleaf. Okay, so not only does it just happen to be National Memoir Day, which Flyleaf nor I knew about, but Maggie wrote, the events coordinator, said we're just going to pretend we knew, but I blew that. It also happens to be the 26th anniversary of Princess Diana's death today.
Oh, wow.
And I worked in conjunction with Landmine Survivors Network when I traveled through Bosnia, and that's the same organization she championed. So while there is a lot of humor in this book, there's a lot of sorrow. People focus on that. There is also a lot of humor, but I am going to read a chapter dedicated to her work. Okay. And this takes place in Tuzla, Bosnia, Herzegovina, about 5 years after the war. In the main lobby of the Hotel Tuzla hangs a painting of 9 life-sized women standing side by side. The wall to the right of the painting is entirely glass, so that the sun throws a spotlight on each woman, one by one, from morning on until they all bask in unison for an hour or so before nightfall. The women vary in their manifestations. 4 are whole and nubile, 2 are sporadically bare-boned, 3 expose both abstract and graphic organs, a red box for a heart, a fibrous lung, musculature that streaks like the lights of a Vegas night. All of the women are clear, delineated with rich black lines and splashes of vivid color, jade, pomegranate. They hold different poses. One crouches, one ponders with a fingertip to her mouth, and another looks out to the sky with her arms stretched toward it. I stare at this painting every time I walk through the lobby, once for over an hour. Is the placement of the piece deliberate so that each muse can have her moment in the sun? I am enthralled, as if I see my own metamorphosis in the painting, as if each hour of sunlight brings a new revelation. For 3 days, I can barely hold a conversation that doesn't include the painting. Tina, having heard enough, begins referring to it as the art of suffering. Beyond the painting, through a set of double glass doors, is a cold industrial lounge, a structure of steel beams and glass. It is shortly after 9, our 3rd night in Tuzla, and Tina and I are sitting at the bar with 2 men. Tina hasn't felt well all afternoon and wants to go back to the room. I asked Tina to at least finish her drink because I don't want to leave the men at the bar, but I don't want to be alone with them either. Salko is sitting to my left. He has amber eyes and no legs. We have a language barrier. He knows about 30 words in English, and I know about 10 in Serbo-Croatian. I turn to him and say, "How old are your daughters?" Salko pauses, then holds up 5 fingers, and then 8. He pulls a photo from his wallet and passes it to Tina and me. 3 faces smile out from the photo, all blonde and long-haired. The man has a beautiful wife. Tina passes the photo back to Salko by reaching across my back. Salko turns to the man on his left. That man is quietly sipping vodka through a coffee stirrer. He knows no English, and he has no arms. "Rasic," Salko speaks to his friend, holding up the picture for him to see. Rasic nods his head in stag-like approval. The men lapse into the thick chock-a-block fricatives of Serbo-Croatian. I turn to Tina. "Can you make it a little longer?" "I'll try," Tina replies, pressing her thumb into her side. She adds, "It's too bad they don't let you have a translator 24/7. Salko taps my shoulder. "You? Children?" "I have 1 daughter," I say. "None," Tina says, shaking her head. Salko raises an eyebrow. Rasic pushes forward his empty glass with a 2-inch stump that balls at the end of his shoulder. Someone has carefully sewn the ends of the thermal he wears so that it fits his stump snugly. Someone has also rolled his flannel overshirt neat and high. He orders another drink. Salko smiles at me, then Tina, and orders another round for us all. Havala, Tina thanks him. I know both Salko and Rasic are Muslim, but I think to myself, like so many others during Sarajevo's 4-year siege, they may have turned to alcohol for relief or escape, or both. A young couple walk up to the bar to pay their tab. They are less than a foot from Rasic. The woman is smartly dressed, wearing a brimmed hat, dark hair, loose curls, red lips. While waiting for his change, her partner strokes her cheek with the backside of his fingers. They don't even notice Rasic sitting next to them, stretching his stumps into the air and yawning. What time do we get started in the morning, Tina asks me. The translator is meeting us in the lobby at 9. Maybe she should meet us outside of the lobby so that she doesn't have to endure a diatribe about that painting, she says. I won't talk about the painting, I promise. And then I think of it. This time, I think of the woman whose flesh stops at the waist and turns skeletal, posing like an overt ballerina. Let me tell you what I think I like most about it. Tina interrupts me with a groan, but I continue. I like how raw it is, how it makes no apology for the easiness of removing flesh. It makes art out of removing flesh. Look, Kelley, I'm glad the piece compels you. Write a damn thesis on it. I don't care. But last night you were approaching strangers in the lobby about it, in your pajamas. They weren't pajamas, I protest. Tina chastens me. She actually calls the painting a muse orgy, to my great delight. Then she asks what's on the schedule for tomorrow. Dinner with the survivor and his family, I say. Salko taps my arm and motions toward my cigarettes. I push the pack toward him. You're not so special here, are you? Tina says suddenly. What do you mean? Usually you're the only one. But here you are in a world made up of amputees, she muses. I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that you mention it, it's rather amusing to think that between the 4 of us here, there are only 3 legs and 6 arms. That sounds like a bad bar joke, Tina says. You mean like the amputee who walks into a bar and says, I'd give my left leg for a stiff one, I say. Tina groans and tries to leave again. Maybe we should excuse ourselves. We do need some rest. I tell Tina that I'm not feeling 100% either, but I don't know if I'm ever going to be in Tuzla, Bosnia and Herzegovina again, and I need to ride it out. I don't want to miss a thing. I finish off my drink and sit back against the stool. Salko slides the pack of cigarettes back toward Tina and me. We both take one, and Salko lights them for us. He lights himself one. They are cigarettes from the duty-free store on the Greek border. He doesn't speak a word or make a gesture as long as a drag is left on it. Then he lights another and holds it while Rasic smokes it, pulling it in and out of the man's mouth between smoke clouds. Do you like America? I ask Salko. He cocks his head toward me, raises his thick eyebrows, and says, I like rock and roll. Then he takes my hand in his large, warm hand and belts out the chorus of Let It Be, and then he laughs and says, Good, no? He gently puts my hand down on the bar and traces the heart-shaped scar on the back of it with the tip of his pointer finger. I don't point out that the song is British. Earlier that morning, Tina and I are sitting in a conference room of the Hotel Tuzla with a group of landmine survivors who counsel other landmine survivors. It is a semi-formal meet and greet, and there I am, suddenly in a room of at least a dozen amputees who've suffered far greater terrors than I've known. I feel small, like my gut is going to unravel. I'm about to slip off to the bathroom to do some deep breathing when the director beckons the translator to start the meeting. Amira, the translator, welcomes me warmly in English. She's the only other woman in the room aside from Tina and me. She repeats the welcome in Serbo-Croatian, and the men around the table clap lightly, which embarrasses me. Then she asks me if I can tell them a little bit about why I am here. I say that I'm going to try to drive around the world. I say that we have something in common, and I lift a leg above the table and tug the pant line up just above the ankle, then set it back down, then lift the other one and show them my wounds. I say that I'm going to visit 5 landmine survivor network sites worldwide, and that I hope to gather stories that might bring some attention to the needs that still remain in those regions. Once the translator finishes, the man closest to my right begins to speak. One after another, they all begin to introduce themselves. The translator repeats these words in nearly every introduction. My name is X. I was a soldier. There are a few farmers, too. And then, in a way that reminds me of the cataloging of the ships in the 2nd chapter of the Iliad, which Tina taught me in college, they tell me what they are missing. Right arm, right leg, left leg, both legs, both arms, both legs and an arm, eyes. And then, when they are finished, there is an awkward silence, because this isn't a normal meeting, and there is no protocol. And then Salco stands up across the table from me and says, "Hello, American woman, show me your legs again." And because of the way he smiles at me and pretended to play an air guitar while he spoke, I stand up and jokingly begin to hum a burlesque tune while slowly lifting up my pant leg as if I'm about to reveal a well-defined fish-netted calf of flesh and blood. The boys love it. Then I pop a leg off and slide it across the table to Salco. My prosthetics aren't all that old, not even 2 years, but they are already beat up from my rowdy ways. Even beat up, the technology is considerably more advanced than the prosthetics I see in the room. Salco admires the duct tape on my foot shells, the knife sheath attached to the socket. Salco speaks to Amira, and Amira tells me how Salco stepped on a bouncing Betty, how he heard it bobbing up and down almost like a water sprinkler, how he fell backward to avoid it, and how it blew both of his legs just below the knees clean off. Bouncing Betty is the worst of the landmines. Perhaps it is the personification of the name, but its function seems just as personal. Its job is to spew shrapnel near the waistline of a man, to maim him where it will hurt him the most without killing him. The Latin word mine, from which the mine in landmine is derived, refers to ore or metal. In war, the Romans would dig a hole, fill the hole with metal spikes, and then disguise it. They would then try to lead their opponents into it. The original intent of the landmine was to maim rather than to kill, so that when other soldiers came to their comrades' aid, the final count of the fallen would be more significant. Salco's wife and 2 daughters escaped the war before it was too late and no one could escape, and they fled to Austria. They eventually returned when they could, Amira said, slowly, quietly, and it occurs to me that Salco might have survived because of love. I was warned not to make any concrete promises in war-torn countries, that unless you can deliver readily, it's like offering a starving child a voucher for a store that's across the globe. I look out the window where the ubiquitous marks of gunfire and mortar shelling are particularly copious on the buildings across the street. The blood was washed away long before I arrived. And how can I not think of my arrival, the high-tech gadgets in my truck, the sat phone just for starters, and here in Tuzla, the windows of many homes are still covered in plastic because they cannot yet afford glass. Skeletal buildings are left unrepaired because nails and wood are too expensive. I feel like an asshole. I speak quietly to Amira. She translates. You gentlemen must think it is crazy for a woman with no legs to try to drive around the world. Salco is unable to conceal his mirth. He bursts out with laughter. Everyone does. Tina pats me on the back, and then Salco says, "We are all crazy. Welcome to Bosnia-Herzegovina." The room bursts with laughter, and we spill out into the lobby where someone wants to take photos. Salco grabs me and sits me sideways on his lap, making sure our lack of legs is showing while the cameras flash us nearly blind, but not enough so that I can't see those 9 women hanging there on that canvas and their 18 lovely legs. I take the men outside to show them Athena. Again, photos are taken in which some of the men are hanging from the cargo rack. Salco and I are sitting on the hood. Then we all smoke cigarettes until Tina and I are whisked off to meet a landmine survivor who became a butcher after the war, who serves us questionable meats for lunch, which lands us in the hotel room all afternoon. At one point, trying to distract Tina from cramps that have her doubled over, I say, I felt like an asshole today, but I think I won them over when I threw my leg across the table. You're not an asshole, she says, but you really won them over when you passed out 2 cartons of our duty-free cigarettes. It's nearing 1 o'clock in the morning, and there is no Amira, no one to translate, just the 4 of us at the bar. We've exhausted our limited language, and Tina too. She steadies herself, pushing back from the bar, and excuses herself for the night. Dovidenya, both Rasic and Salko say. I'll walk you to the elevator, I say, and once we are on the other side of the double glass doors, I thank her for staying so long and ask her if she is okay and if she wants help to the room. And she replies, not unless you think you should go back to the room yourself. What do you mean? I ask. Do you think it's wise to sit up at a bar all night in Tuzla drinking with these men? Tina, come on, I reply, rolling my eyes toward the painting. The women are in the dark. Not even the low light in the lobby can bring them fully to life. I'll be fine. I'll finish my drink and come back to the room. That wasn't necessarily a comment about you, Tina says. You don't know these men, what they might think, what the war might have done to them. The door to the elevator opens. Go on, Tina, I'll be fine. She kisses me quickly on the cheek. I slip back into the lounge before the elevator door shuts. The bartender's cigarette smoke hovers and curves. The smoke is stark against the backdrop of the night sky on the other side of the glass walls. Rasic is face down at the bar. The bartender crushes the butt in an ashtray, then hands Salko a wool blanket that he has stored under the bar. Salko spreads it out on a wooden bench in a quiet corner. Then he and the bartender carry Rasic to the bench and leave him there in a muted snore. Salko is sweating. His thigh brushes against mine as he sits back down at the bar. He stares at me, a puzzled look on his face. He seems to want to explain something to me, but cannot. Perhaps I am projecting my own frustration. Perhaps I should have gone to the room with Tina. Pivo? Salvo asks me. Yes, pivo, Havala. I'll have another beer. Thank you. The bartender smirks. Salko laughs at me. I blush. The cold beer is delicious. I feel a small second wind. Halfway through the beer, the bartender leaves and never returns. We simply sit, Salko and I, quietly in the bar before dawn, sipping beer and smoking cigarettes. At some point, I glance up at the ceiling. It's nearly 20 feet high. A metal-plated column runs the length. 10 feet up the column, a string of bullet holes runs horizontally like a stream surface pocked with raindrops. I try to focus in on the black center of the holes and find myself wishing I could climb inside one of them. Who did I think I was coming to this place? Why am I staying up until near dawn with this man whom I cannot even speak? The war is one thing, I rationalize, but amputation has a language of its own. A shared knowledge of such trauma and resiliency requires no translation. Bang, bang, Salko shouts close to my ear, watching me stare at the bullet holes. I nearly fall off the bar stool. He starts laughing. I laugh too, and pointing toward the bathroom, I excuse myself. The water can't come out of the faucet quickly enough. I wring my hands under the cold flow and then part them down the bridge of my nose. I look at my reflection in the small mirror over the sink. I don't recognize myself. In front of me stands a loose apparition of who I had once been. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. My sweet Athena, the expedition's Land Rover, and the entire trip are being paid for by a malpractice settlement. Until today, I never realized the illusion of security that comes with being an American. I've never been this close to a war and its inhabitants. And yet, Salko, cut the same way I am, though with what I perceive as multiplied sufferings, seems to want me to be there as much as I want to be here. Maybe Tina is right. Maybe all I wanted was to be in a room full of amputees. Maybe I want to know that I am not alone. However, the amputation that these folks have endured are beyond the severity of what I've experienced. At least that's what my mind says. A mind that doesn't fully understand yet that you can't compare suffering except in terms of perspective. There's always someone worse off. Humility hits me like a hangover, throbbing and thorough. I douse my face again, dry off with my shirt sleeve, and return, swaggering, a combination of the alcohol and sore stumps, back to the lounge. Though there is still no bartender, there are 2 fresh beers in front of Salko and me. I look at him, he winks. A 5 o'clock shadow is forming on his chin. We clink beers and I offer him a cigarette. He lights it and smokes it with his eyes fixed on mine until halfway through the cigarette, I tear myself from his gaze. I swig the beer and feel done in, worn out, but high. I lean forward and rest my chin to my forearm, extend the other arm across the length of the bar, and watch a smoke snake rise from the burning ash. I see Salko gently clench the cigarette from my hand and set it in the ashtray without bothering to extinguish it. When I wake, my face is in the crook of my elbow, and the sky is cinereous blue. Rasich is snoring with a low whistle, and I don't remember falling asleep. My neck pains as I pull upright. Salko is sitting perfectly straight on his stool, looking forward, silent. He beams when he notices my movement. He gestures with his head toward the atrium doors. When I don't respond, he takes me by the wrist and leads me out of the lounge. We pass the painting. I pull back and motion toward it. Do you like it? Salko looks quickly, distractedly at the life-sized women hovering above us, then pulls his eyes away hurriedly, seemingly confused. He abruptly takes my hand in his, kisses me on the cheek, and says, "Good night, God be with you," and then he leaves. My mind is on coffee and whether or not I have offended him by bringing up the muse orgy. Does he not like art? Or does his trauma linger so close in the morning air that he can't risk relishing something as beautiful as art? As if beauty is all too much to risk again. After all, there are still bullet holes in the bar where we were sitting all night, and in the painting, the innards of women are exposed. Are the shades of suffering represented in the painting still too loud in Salko's mind to even be considered a thing of beauty made with a brush? The opposite of hope is a place. Behind the Hotel Tuzla, where I go to have a cigarette instead of going back to the room, there is a small, sparsely wooded park dotted with the same young trees that line the streets. Glossy with dew, stone tiles form a patio with wrought iron tables for 2, and in the center, there's a statue of a 6-foot metallic teardrop. Behind the teardrop, there is a knoll where Salko has stopped and sits on the damp ground. I watch him from a distance. His back is to me. In front of him, the Tuzla skyline of struggling factories, salt baths, and mines is on the eastern horizon. A few funnels smoke gray against the pre-dawn sky. I want to walk over and join him, to take his hand in my own. I simply want to connect with him, but I am afraid of his reaction. Would it be as natural and pure as my own intention feels? I start to take a step in his direction when the sun cuts the sky, blindingly salmon, in a pencil-thin line. Then, Salko lifts up his pant legs and removes his prosthetics. He sets them to the side. He rises up onto his knees and opens his mouth and begins to pray the first salah of the day. And as that man sings that holy prayer, the sun persists, and suddenly I feel as close to God in all things that a human might, like a pixel in a divine painting. I begin to weep. My fatigue is coupled with a body ache that doesn't compare to the bliss growing inside of my being. Salt cakes upon my cheeks. I hear the tremble in Salko's voice and I know that I am not alone. When Salco's prayer floats away and pink overwhelms the sky and the flesh is illuminated in its mortal light, Salco puts his legs back on and stands up and notices me in the distance. He nods toward me, wanders away, and I never see him again.
Thank you, Kelley, very much. Questions, folks?
I think they need to breathe for a second.
Okay. I'll ask one. We're hearing about landmines in the Ukraine, and I've wondered, since those reports have been coming in, what you were thinking and making of the reports.
It's a repetition of what I've seen, and part of the reason I wrote this, when you get to that chapter, is because they begged me to tell these stories in order to try to prevent something from happening again. But this is humanity, this is yin and yang, this is the way life works, so maybe this story is timely.
I think so.
It's incredibly painful to see these reports. It reminds me very much of, if you consider all of us as a body, Ukraine has gone septic. And if we don't treat sepsis in the foot, you're going to lose your legs or maybe your whole life. And that whole body needs to respond. And so that's part of how I feel about putting this out there, is maybe it's a balm. Maybe it'll be some aloe.
Well, it's from a very real, powerful life. It's not theoretical.
Nor is it political.
No.
Abdul?
Hey, Kelley.
Hello, brother.
My question is, what effect has the Salah had on your life from that time to now?
I grew up partly Greek Orthodox, partly evangelical, in those two realms, and the morning that was the first experience of my exposure to the Salah, and it opened the door to, I sort of had this philosophy already, but really just, we come from different tribes all over, and we all have our own gods, but we have different names, and so his God was no different than any God I've ever been introduced to, and the beauty and the humility with which he revered that God was just so stunning and powerful and humane, and so it sort of destroyed stereotypes, if you will, in my heart.
Kelley, there's a resonance in the room for sure, and there was an expression that, joy multiplies and grief divides when we share the story. And I'm thinking about the title of your book, The Wounds That Bind Us. And I know how I feel in this moment and how the room feels. What's it feel like for you to be able to speak that into the room?
It's been a long time. To be fair, y'all, Barbara is my somatic coach, and she has helped me move a lot of trauma. So we have a little resonance too. But no, it feels like serendipity, because as a writer, you're constantly waiting, and I have been in the presence of great writers for a long time and have not had a book. So there was I am a writer, but I also knew that when it was time, it would be the right time. And so it feels very serendipitous.
Yeah.
I'm just very curious about painting. Because I love the way, Did you learn who did the painting and what was the story behind it?
I have tried. And I have one sort of half blurry photo left from those days of that painting. And I've made phone calls, but the language barrier, and so I have not fully gotten to the bottom of the painting. I've Googled every paintings in Hotel Tuzla, whatever. But this was 20-some years ago.
Yeah.
So, I don't know it. No.
Is it still there?
I doubt it. Yeah, I very much doubt it because the Hotel Tuzla was still just starting to go under reconstruction after the war. And like I said, there were still bullet holes all over.
Oh.
I want to say that I love hearing this book with your voice.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's ways to do audio, but you just bring it so to
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful just to listen
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how I think the press has to pitch it to those people. I think they're in the middle of that.
Good.
Yeah.
Nice.
If the press is around.
If the press is here, pitch away.
You'll enjoy that. That will be very meaningful.
Have you done that?
Mm.
My fellow Red Clay Rambler, Jack Carrick, sitting back there, and I took my first UNC Press book and
Oh,
digitized it.
I love that. Now, wait, how did that work back then? I mean, were these CDs? Were we cassette taping? Like, what were we doing? Huh?
8-track.
Tracks. Yeah.
He's teasing you, Kelly. Back then was a year ago. It's been a long time coming. Other thoughts, inquiries, queries?
Anybody car going on?
You're right here. Yeah.
I rode my bike.
I want to know more about the car.
The Land Rover?
Athena?
Yeah, Athena.
Yeah.
What happened to Athena?
For those of you that read the book, the Land Rover is an amazing. They only made 8 of these. They were military vehicles. They were only made 8 for the public use, and they were made for Sir Ranulph Fiennes. He's a British expeditionist, knighted for being the first man to go across the Antarctic by foot. And so for Land Rover's 50th anniversary, they made these vehicles for him to drive around the world. They were even so amazing that they could drive onto a catamaran and power the catamaran to get across straits and fjords. They were cool. Well, the rumor was, and I believe it's true, but Ranulph Fiennes at the last minute wanted more money for the trek. And Land Rover's like, we just made these vehicles. Like, come on. And so the trip didn't happen. And these Land Rovers just kind of like went off into garages and random places. And so when I was living in England training for this trip for a year, I got introduced to a guy who had one of them, and he basically sold it to me. It was the equivalent of like 18 grand. But it cost almost 150,000 to make each one of these. But he loved what I was doing. So I took it. We went journeying, but I couldn't bring it back to the States with me because it wasn't an antique. It had to be 25 years or older. So I donated it to a landmine clearance company that I knew, and they ran remotely from the back of the Land Rover their landmine clearance machines.
Oh,
And
wow.
then when they retired, they sold it back to the Land Rover enthusiast, and now it is in a Land Rover museum in England. That's
I love
what
Athena.
happened to Athena.
Yeah, I love Athena. Thank you.
Yeah,
I like that.
yeah,
What a story for a car.
yeah. That's like yeah. I get excited. That's like off-road.
Have you ever been as
Total. Yeah.
Have you ever been as emotionally attached to an inanimate object as that vehicle?
Well, I am really in love with my 20-year-old black Ford Ranger that I brought back to life after Hurricane Dorian, which is my current vehicle, the Black Knight.
It was a drowning survivor.
It drowned, and it's the only one in the neighborhood I could get running again. And so I still drive that thing religiously, and it'll be sad when it's done.
That might not happen, Kelley.
I might not.
From Athena to the Black Knight.
Right?
How old were you when you started this adventure, and why?
Oh, the old part was easy. Gosh, we left. Let's see, how old were you when I had you? I was 26 or 7. I was 27 when we took off. I started off-roading as a replacement for 2 weeks before I lost my legs. I was offered a full ride to Ohio State for cross-country and track. I was a runner from the time I was 9 to 16. It was a huge part of my life. So off-roading racing became a replacement for that. And that sort of inspired it. And then I actually happened to be sitting in on a conference where they were talking about landmines, and I was like, I'm gonna drive around the world and I'm gonna help these people. Because I grew up when Virginia Slims said we came a long way, baby.
That's right.
When women could be president and when you could do anything you want, according to Schoolhouse Rocks, and I believed it all. I just believed it all. That fades, doesn't it? Do it while you're young, honey.
Any other questions, folks? Well, on behalf of Flyleaf and Kelley Shinn, thank you very much for coming tonight, and I imagine there may be more copies of The Wounds That Bind Us, and you get not only the book, you have gotten provenance of Athena and how to find her when you're abroad. Thanks for coming, and stay and visit. This is a very hospitable place to be. Thank you, Flyleaf, and thank you, Kelley. Thank you, Kelley.